Hi, today what I'd like to talk about is something we found out in our research for young people in the colleges, PUC and degree across India. And this series on youth moral issues has a connection to moral accountability. Traditionally, India was a country that had a strong sense of moral accountability to some form of intelligent designer, creator, and more recently, because of an emphasis of scientific, of evolution teaching in schools and colleges, we see that people are tending to change their perspective and understanding. We found that it was split. 50% people believed in an intelligent designer that was the best explanation for the origins of man. So some people call it special creation or God. And about 50% of people believed in evolution. There was an overlap. Half the people that believed in evolution said they believed in both. Now, so what is strange when we have this debate is people say, well, science or intelligent design, science or God. I think that title seems to suggest that the evolution is the scientific answer and then the intelligent design is like a religious or philosophical answer, whereas I'd like to just talk about the science of intelligent design, because I believe that if you have some form of faith, it means that you're morally accountable. It means it does matter how you live. And I think that personally, the saturation of our world today with an understanding that we're just chemicals, that we came from monkeys, makes some people behave like monkeys. And so let's look at this. I'd like to look at 4 different sorts of evidence from the fossil record. When we're talking about origins, fossils gives millions of classified different sorts of ancient life. I don't claim that I believe one particular age for this universe, but we're going to look at the fossil evidence, then we're going to look at DNA and the cell, we're going to look at the Big Bang and the origin of the universe, and finally we're going to look at probability and maths. Now, if we evolved from a single-celled organism, like bacteria or something, we would expect in the fossil records to see life starting simply and gradually, continuously changing. There should be no missing links at all. It should be a continuous stream of evidence of this gradual change. There can be no leap because they don't believe in a creator, and therefore it's just a genetic mutation. You know, like a mongrel has a genetic mutation. It's like a disease which supposedly could, in theory, add some extra survival instinct to help that new species to survive more, and by the survival of the fittest, which no one disputes, it could then develop. Suppose if there was an intelligent designer, we would expect to see life starting complex, evidenced in the fossil record, and there to be distinct groups of phyla or species or animals that were each created in a different group or family by the designer. That's how we'd expect. Now, the scientists tell us that the earliest form of life was the Cambrian periods. And let's look at what Richard Dawkins says about the fossil record of the creatures that lived in that time. We find many of them already in an advanced state of evolution, the very first time they appear. It's as though they were just planted there without any evolutionary history. Needless to say, this appearance of sudden planting has delighted creationists. So in the textbooks, this tree of life which adorns our textbooks, the evidence is only really for the nodes and the outer extremes. The rest is really made up. Richard Dawkins was saying that, you know, in the Cambrian, the earliest periods, spontaneous, advanced life appeared. Darwin, in his Origin of the Species, who came up with this theory of evolution in the first place, this is what he said: innumerable transitional forms must have existed, but why we do not find them embedded in countless numbers in the crust of the earth? Why don't we find them? Why is it not in every geological formation, every stratum, full of such intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain. And this perhaps is the greatest objection which can be urged against my theory. Now, Charles Darwin thought that that was at his time, but as we went on in science, we would find all these missing links, or missing millions of fossils. We'd find it later on. But this is what all these quotes I'm quoting from evolutionists. So there's no religious bias. All these are atheists, scientists who don't actually believe in intelligent design. But let's look at their honest confessions of the weakness of the theory. David Ralph, Chicago Field Museum of Natural History, says, "We are now 120 years after Darwin, and the knowledge of fossil record has been greatly expanded. We now have 250,000 fossil species. But the situation hasn't changed much. Ironically, we have fewer examples of evolutionary transition than we had in Darwin's time." So, basically, this is what you'd expect. If man came from fish and monkeys and bacteria, then this is what we'd expect in the fossil record: a continuous, slow change of millions of species with no gaps. Unfortunately, this is what we find. The evidence is of each of the species plus or minus. People say this word missing link or transitional form, but missing link as if to say it's a singular. That itself is deceiving. There's no link at all. There's no chain at all. It's distinct species of animals. Minor adaptations are well documented, but Darwin took the microevolution and applied it on a macro level. He explained survival of the fittest. He didn't explain arrival of the fittest. When we look at microevolution, like the lengths of his features, it's just scrambled genetic information. There's no new code. It's like Windows 7 with a different visual theme. You know, blue to red, there's no new code. It's just a different number, different parameter, different lengths of beaks. It's just not a different code, just a different parameter. There's nothing new in that. There's nothing new, more complex in that that's come out of a genetic disorder or mutation. Some people are finding it hard now to believe that such creativity and advancedness of life came from genetic mutation. Like I quoted earlier, the most famous example, mongrel children, is the functionality is less, not more. In fact, in the textbook it says, here's all the examples of changed moths with changed genetic code. All of these are destructive, but we believe that a constructive change is how we got here, but we don't have any examples of that. I think some of the evidence is missing. Say you went through the jungle and suddenly you came across this building, and you think, wow, how the wind eroded the shape of that over millions of years. Then at further inspection, you see the door and you see what looks like steps. And you say, no, I think that's an ancient civilization that made that building. Isn't that scientific to look at the structure, the design, and conclude it was made, it was designed? It wasn't eroded by random processes. Again, no one would look at this Mount Rushmore mountain in America and say that the wind and the rain carved out the faces of those 4 famous American presidents. We would say that someone chiseled that out over years or months, decades, and someone designed that to look like those faces. The human face is clearly designed. How much more your human face, not just in rock, with all the functionality clearly designed. That could never, yeah, there might be a chance in a million billion that some of the no's could come in a range, but not such design like that. No one would believe that that came about by random processes. It's far more scientific to say that is the result of an artist, an intelligent being that carved out those faces. How much more your face, the real face, is actually designed. Again, if we find these patterns and these symbols and writing, we would conclude, oh, this must be an ancient language. Actually, it's ancient hieroglyphics. And correct, we look at the evidence and we see there's design implications. Now, Darwin said, well, the single cell is just a plasma. It's very, very simple. It's just some chemicals. And therefore, he started his theory there with already having cells. But now, when we look at the cell today, we realize we can't just start there. We have to go back and say, where does this cell come from? A single cell is more advanced than the satellites orbiting the Earth. And let's look at this video which shows how complex a cell is.
So what is in a cell as far as we know now?
A world that Darwin never could have imagined.
I needed someone who could give me a glimpse into this world. So we went to molecular biologist Doug Axe.
Think of a cell as being a nanofactory, a factory where on a very small scale, digital instructions are being used to make the components of the factory. Here we have the famous DNA double helix. You can see the two helical strands that are intertwined and wind around each other on the outside of the molecule. This is the material that stores all of our genetic information. In higher life forms, this will be the equivalent of something like a gigabyte of information stored in the molecules that form the individual chromosomes, all packed within the nucleus, which is a tiny fraction of the entire cell size. So what does DNA do? Well, the information in DNA ends up providing the information for sequencing the amino acids to make protein. We have information in a one-dimensional form that provides the information for a three-dimensional form.
I'm finally just beginning to grasp the complexity of the cell. Are there systems within the cell that go well beyond Darwinian evolution? Some type of cellular technology that drives adaptation, replication, quality control, and repair? What if these new mechanisms have massive design implications? Well, I say, so be it.
The cell really is like nothing we've ever seen in the physical world. That's got to be firmly grasped. That's not something we can just say, oh, well, it's just a little bit more of the same old, same old. It's not the same old, same old.
We are finding is that there's information that's in the cell that cannot be accounted for in terms of these undirected material causes. So there's,
it has to be.
And so there's some other, so there has to be an information source.
So one of the key questions faced by modern biology is, where do you get information from?
Well, Darwin assumed that the increase in information comes from natural selection. But natural selection reduces genetic information, and we know this from all the genetic population studies that we have.
And where does the new genetic information going to come from?
Well, that's the big question.
So when we find information in the DNA molecule, the most likely explanation is that it too had an intelligent source.
I mean, we need engineering principles to understand these systems, okay? I mean, it's only because of our advancements in nanotechnology that we can even begin to appreciate these systems.
But using intelligent design didn't seem to stop the scientists I spoke with, so why all the controversy?
Suppose we find, simply as a matter of fact, that our scientific inquiries point in one direction.
Which is that there's an intelligent creator.
Why should we eliminate that from discussion?
So yeah, the cell is a nanofactory. The cell is so complex with all those processes in it. Again, it has design implications scientifically. Science evidence for it, not religious, but science evidence. Okay, let's come to the next. My post-graduation and my teaching, lecturing was in statistics, so I really like probability. And it's interesting to look at the probability of some of these, what some people claim is evolutionary transitions. The best example of probability showing the science of intelligent design is looking at the formation of proteins. Proteins are made in humans of 20 different amino acids in a sequence of usually a simple protein will have about 100 minimum, a chain of 100 amino acids. Now, for these proteins to be functional, useful, to do what they're meant to do, you can't just have any old amino acids. Science has shown that they have to be in the exact order. It's the order that determines their functionality, and if they're changed, they don't work. Now, just think of the chances of these 20 different amino acids being in the right order. Well, the chance of the first one being right is 1 in 20. The second one, 1 in 20 squared, or 1 in 400. The third one, 1 in 20 to the power of 3. And so all of them right order, 1 in 20 to the power of 100. That is the same as 1 in a trillion, 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 trillion. In other words, impossible. You know, there's got to be a place where you say, well, that's just, you know, while doing all those processes and getting that, something else will come in and mess it up. It's just impossible. Just like the faces carved out the rock, it's impossible for the wind to do it. It's not just very, very, very unlikely. It goes beyond improbable. There has to be a cutoff point. Even scientists accept that such a remote possibility is impossible. And there has to be another scientific explanation. Now, prior to 1950s, when Watson and Crick discovered the double helix of DNA, there was a theory called chemical predestination. And actually continued after the discovery of DNA, but they didn't fully understand the operation of the DNA to sequencing the amino acids. But they felt that there was some form of attraction between the amino acids which would cause them to go into this specific chain which causing functionality. In other words, that they would be some property within the amino acids which would attract itself to the other amino acids and then get this very unlikely chance actually happening. But when they discovered DNA, they proved that no, these do not come together at random at all. And even the person who wrote the book, Chemical Predestination, changed his mind and said, this obviously shows there is intelligent design here. And what it is about DNA is a code inside the cell which actually determines the order of the amino acids in the protein. And the actual information is stored. It is not by chance at all. I don't think anyone would gamble their life on something like 1 in a trillion. Even if all the processes in the universe for 14 billion years in this massive universe were devoted to trying to get this one protein, which I've just described, it would still be a chance in 1 in a trillion. That's impossible. So when we look at how finely tuned the universe is. We'll come to that in a minute. When they look at how impossible it is just to get the cosmological constant that determines the rate of expansion of the universe, when it's so low, they say, this is impossible. There must be an either scientific explanation, it can't be chance, or there are hundreds of trillions of universes, they say. So they accept it's impossible. Okay, so now let's look at this. The universe is so finely tuned. Not only do we see evidence of design in the micro level, but in the macro level as well. The constants, if they were changed in one part in a million, life would be impossible. The same with speed of light, Planck's Newtonian gravitational constant, cosmological constant. If a tiny change, the universe couldn't exist. The universe structure couldn't exist. The universe is finely tuned. That points to intelligent designer that's designed it this way to work. When confronted with this, as I mentioned just before, the atheists say, yeah, we have to agree this is impossible, so therefore they suddenly decide that they want to assume there are a billion universes to make this probability reasonable and open to chance. So we don't want to believe in a designer, but we're okay with suddenly believing in a billion universes, though there's no evidence whatsoever scientifically. Now, if you want to believe that, that's fine, but don't call that science. Don't call that science. And don't teach it as an exclusive scientific theory. In every university, I always challenge the biologists, paleontologists, cosmologists, to a debate on intelligent design versus evolution, and be really interesting debate. I've taught on it a number of times, been invited to speak on it, but many of the professors that I talk to in India, they say, well, we don't believe in evolution either. So I say, well, why are you teaching it? Well, we have to. So, you know, you should ask your science teacher, sir, do you actually believe this? You should also challenge it and say, are there other scientific theories? You know, I don't think that it's science shows evolution and religion shows intelligent design. No, I think the most scientific theory, looking at the finely tuned universe, the probabilities of structured life, the fossil records, complexity of a cell, the most scientific explanation is design by an intelligent being. Now, the final part of my argument, let's look at DNA itself. DNA is a double helix containing 4 chemicals, which we give the abbreviations A, C, T, and G. I call it act of God. That's my personal preference. But A, C, T, and G are base 4. A computer is made of zeros and ones. It is base 2, on and off within the silicon chip. And this is not like a code, it is absolutely a code, which one of the functions is to sequence amino acids. There are 3 billion nucleotide base pairs in one cell, one human cell, DNA. Now that I've worked it out and others have worked it out, that's equivalent to 4,000 textbooks of information. That's every PUC subject and every degree subject and all the professional courses and ITI. All those textbooks, if you put together, probably less than 4,000 actually. So every bit of knowledge that every college student learns is amazingly stored in this micro, most efficient storage information system. It's a library. Every cell, the nucleus, is the library. It's the instruction manual. It is not like a computer program. It is a computer program. That's interesting that Bill Yates, the richest man in the world and the designer and architect of Microsoft company and Microsoft Windows, says that the information inside a cell is not like a computer program. It is a computer program, only something far more complex than anything we've written. And yeah, it's not like 4,000 manuals. It is 4,000 manuals. Okay, now who could accept that you drop the Scrabble letters and you get the Oxford Dictionary. Even if you had, 14 billion years, if you kept dropping enough Scrabble letters on the floor, you may occasionally get THE or AT, 2 or 3 letters, short words coming, you can read it here or there. But getting them all straight and getting the whole Oxford Dictionary is not just very, very unlikely. It is impossible. It is impossible. We've got the Oxford Dictionary, it's everywhere. But it didn't happen by random processes. It happened by intelligent human beings. And these 4,000 manuals in every one of your 10 trillion cells did not come about by random processes scientifically. And you can believe that. If you want to believe that, that's your faith. It's your religion. Atheism is a religion. But let's not call it the only explanation of science. Some people have their presuppositions. They don't want an intelligent designer. They rule that out, and therefore they start with the premise that that cannot be on the table. That option of an intelligent designer cannot be on the table. You have to ask them why. Maybe they're upset. Maybe they're hurt in life. Maybe at one point they were angry with God, maybe, and don't believe in him anymore, or maybe they don't like the idea or the moral accountability of there being an intelligent designer. Now, the subject, who is that designer, is beyond the scope of this course, and I think it's something that every reasonable thinking human being will want to devote considerable interest, conversation, research, inquiry, prayer to find out. What does he expect from us? What is he like? What are the great different philosophers and prophets of history? What do they say? Every one of us has to look at that and think carefully. Ultimate issues, determined on eternal destiny, may be determined by what we believe on these crucial, fundamental issues and answers. Now, there is a SETI program in which the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, in which they're constantly monitoring radio waves and other waves from outer space, deep space. And they say if we can get one line of code, it proves there's life on other planets. Typically, they say, we are coming in 2025, don't shoot. If they find that code coming from outer space, they say it proves there's intelligent life in outer space. Well, we don't have one line, don't shoot, we're coming in 2025. We have 4,000 textbooks in every one of our cells. We've found, we search, we're pointing the telescopes in the wrong way. We found evidence of intelligent life inside. It's the signature in the cell. It's the pointer towards intelligence. And if there's intelligence, then we are morally accountable. Hence, we should not get caught up with porn and premarital sex. We should go according to the Maker's instructions. It appears in every religion. You should be pure until you're married, according to the Maker's instruction manual. What would be the point of missing out instruction manual for a laptop and putting in 400 volts instead of 200 volts, ruining your laptop? Read the Maker's instructions for your laptop and for your body. Lastly, we need to look at the Big Bang. And this is the idea that everything came out of absolutely nothing, which most scientists believe. Let's look at this little video and then I'll discuss it and talk about it.
The only way to debate this issue is to look at the available evidence, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to put God on trial, with Professor Radisson as the prosecutor, me as the defense attorney, and you as the jury. Most cosmologists now agree that the universe began some 13.7 billion years ago in an event known as the Big Bang. So let's look at theoretical physicist and Nobel Prize winner Steven Weinberg's description of what the Big Bang would have looked like. And since he's an atheist, we can be sure there isn't any believer bias in his description. In the beginning, there was an explosion, and in 3 minutes, 98% of the matter there is or ever will be was produced. We had a universe. For 2,500 years, most scientists agreed with Aristotle on the idea of a steady-state universe, that the universe has always existed with no beginning and no end. But the Bible disagreed. In the 1920s, Belgian astronomer George Lemaitre, a theist, who's actually also...
What's a theist?
A theist is someone who believes in the existence of God. He said that the entire universe, jumping into existence in a trillionth of a second, out of nothingness in an unimaginably intense flash of light, is how he would expect the universe to respond if God were to actually utter the command in Genesis 1:3, "Let there be light." In other words, the origin of the universe unfolded exactly how one would expect after reading Genesis, and for 2,500 years, the Bible had it right, and science had it wrong. All of which points to a God that created it. You see, in the real world, we never see things jumping into existence out of nothingness, but atheists want to make one small exception to this rule, namely the universe and everything in it.
So that was a college student having a debate with his lecturer, who was an atheist, about the origins of life and the universe. And it was a philosophy class. It was actually from a film which came out recently. But the point is, number one, scientists no longer believe that the universe is steady state. The majority of cosmologists believe that the whole universe, space and time itself, wasn't a blob of rock that exploded into space. No, space itself didn't exist, time didn't exist, matter and energy didn't exist. A singularity, there was nothing, absolutely nothing. And into this nothing, everything came within a very tiny amount of time. And as the believer in the video pointed out, that's exactly what you would expect if there was an infinite being. Not energy, not mass, but something beyond this physical world, a person, a designer, who has a purpose for people's lives, who wants people to live a reasonable life, who likes them, who's kind, who's very forgiving, who likes all people, who expects all people to change and search for him. Originally, Edwin Hubble, he found out and discovered, to shake cosmology about 100 years ago, that all the galaxies were moving away from each other. And more recently, in about the 90s, they documented that they're actually accelerating away from each other. No one knows why. They call it dark energy, but they don't really understand. It's just a name for we don't know what it is. And they don't know how the galaxies hold together. There's not enough mass. They call it dark matter. It's just a name for we don't know what it is. They haven't got exact proof of it. But for some reason, the whole universe is expanding. And so they run the tape back and assume that it came from a single point, and certainly the maths and there's other evidences that seem to suggest that's what happened. Now, it's interesting today, people say it's the Big Bang or gods. That wasn't how it was when the Big Bang was first discovered by Edwin Hubble and the science that followed. In fact, Einstein realized his maths pointed towards the universe not being a steady state and it coming from nothing, and he put in a fudge factor to change the cosmological constant so that it actually steadied it out. After Edwin Hubble found the proof of an expanding universe, Einstein said it was the biggest mistake of his career, that he had actually put in this fudge factor, and he said it came from nothing. Again, in normal life, you know, we don't see suddenly out of nothing things appearing, but the evolutionists, atheists, want to make a small exception to that, namely the entire universe. You know, some people with faith would say, hey, I said a prayer and this small thing changed. And people without faith will laugh and say, hey, you can't see a blind person have their retina that tiny retina healed by a little prayer. But the atheists believe that not just a retina, but everyone's retina and all the atoms behind the eye and the entire universe just came into being out of nothing. So that's interesting. So I think that personally the atheists have more faith than believers. When we look at evolution in high school, you're often shown these photos of different embryos. And when I was at school, all the missing links that were the icons of evolution have since been disproved. And whenever they seem to find a new transitional form or one of the millions of required missing links, not the missing link, it's millions required, as we showed earlier, they always say it's always big news. Science has found the missing link. Well, didn't they do that last year when you put that on the news? But when they find out that it's proven not to be what they thought it was, they don't put that in the news. So there seems to be a media bias between the science of intelligent design and the science of evolution. They seem to be biased towards genetic mutations accounting for the development of complex life. It's interesting as well, when they're arguing, they talk about the plan and the miracle of evolution and the creative power. Hold on a minute, power and miracle and plan. You don't believe in those things. How can you use those words, miracle? If you don't believe in miracles, you only believe in the physical universe, naturalistic approach. Why should we? Even now with the Big Bang, what they're saying is that, come back to embryo in a moment, they're saying that everything coming out of nothing, well, there has to be another dimension. Another universe, something else. Well, isn't that what theologians and religious people all along, philosophers, have said? You know, that's what they said. There's something else out there. There is purpose, there is intelligence, there's someone that's keeping control of this universe, who holds all things, who stretched it out for a purpose. Sorry, coming back lastly to the comparative embryology, or looking at the embryos of different species and phyla and animals at early stages, and comparing them and saying, well, they look the same. Well, one, looking at the two-dimensional photos doesn't say anything about the genes. It's the genetic code that we should compare to see if it's reasonable that one went from one to another. By the way, when, going back to Bill Yates, going back to Microsoft, when Microsoft want to move from Windows 10 to Windows 11, wrong numbers, but Windows 10 to Windows 11, Windows 7 to Windows 8, do they employ toddlers, 1-year-olds, with hammers on the keyboards to bang in at random on the keyboard to hopefully create some new functionality on their package? When they reboot, would it work? Oh, no, I think if they put toddlers that put code in at random, just a few places that they take it out, it would have a virus and it wouldn't work at all. It's so complex, Microsoft Windows. You mess it up a little bit, you get a virus in here and there, and you have to reinstall Windows. It doesn't work. No, they do not employ toddlers or random processes or take a magnet to the hard drive. No, they employ the most brilliant computer minds, computer programmers, to think, huge teams, hundreds of them. To get new functionality, you need lots of intelligence, and then you reboot and you have touch sensitive, you have different functionality. Mouse pads with 5 fingers that you can touch, etc. So, you know, how can we believe that this complexity comes from random processes? Other people say, well, you've got to look at the universe from within the universe, and it's not right to look at it outside the universe. That's like saying, you know, if you're looking at Microsoft Windows, you have to look within the Microsoft Windows for the source of Microsoft Windows. Now, if you're a program within Microsoft Windows, you couldn't possibly understand Microsoft Windows except if you looked outside the program to Bill Yates. There is, on another level itself, dimension, the source comes, the origin comes. Going back to the embryos, lastly. So it's unfair to compare the two-dimensional pictures of these things. It's the genetics we need to look at. And this particular picture, you know, the fact that they look similar is irrelevant. The key issue is the ability to infer a genetic relationship between two species to prove genetic mutations led to a more complex form coming from a less complex form. The appearance is deceptive, partly because similarity of structure does not imply necessarily an identical genetic heritage. And even as evolutionists will admit that the example behind is a mammal and a fish, completely different genetics, and there. So we've looked at a number of areas, specifically DNA, Big Bang, cell, complex life, maths, probability, and the fossil records. And you know, we come from evolution. Well, if not, what are the implications? As I've mentioned a number of times, it does count how we live. You have an exam, your SSLC, PUC, +2 degree, professional exams. You also have a lifetime exam, a moral exam. It does matter how you live. People call it karma, justice. There's different names, but it all comes down to the same thing. It does really matter whether we're patient or not, whether we're self-controlled or not, whether we are kind and forgiving, generous or stingy, lazy person or a disciplined person. It does matter. It affects us forever. We should think about these things and take these things very seriously. And my suggestion is, let's challenge, let the professors rise up and challenge the evolution from science. Let there be debate in colleges from the science. And if you can't understand it, don't accept it. Let's go back to high school. And did we really understand it? Did it make sense? Was there a gap? Let's challenge it. Look at the go on Google and research these things. See if they've been disproved. Finding life in test tubes 50 years ago. Was it really? Did they really create life and amino acids? There's loads of problems which scientifically have been looked at. Let's not keep teaching the children this and turning them, making their behavior like monkeys. You can find out more on Rescue by liking Facebook page Rescue 108. You can rewatch this class, get your friends to watch it, and thank you very much for your time.
Bill Gates, who pioneered the personal computer and founded Microsoft, once said, "Human DNA is like a computer program, but far more advanced than any software we've ever created." The implications of this statement are quite profound and controversial. It seems as if Mr. Gates is calling things in our cells information and DNA a kind of software program. Most typically think of a computer as something we use to access the internet or to email a friend. However, that's an example of an electronic computer. We also have mechanical and biological computers. The necessary and sufficient components of any functional computer are memory for data storage, an executable program containing instructions for processing data, the processor, which executes the instructions, and the capability to produce meaningful output. Many components of cells are components of real biological computers, equivalent to the components of electronic computers. For instance, DNA and RNA can hold prescriptive information or algorithms, and proteins can be used to hold, transfer, or process data. Proteins are the output generated by the translation process of a ribosome's computer system. Scientists have also discovered something known as the interactome, which is an incredibly dynamic network used by the cell for internal communication. It's like the internet of the cell, where proteins, RNA, and DNA can stay in constant communication with each other. We also know there is a cell-to-cell exchange of information integrating our entire body. So, how accurate was Mr. Gates? Well, in 2010, the noted microbiologist Craig Venter and his team accomplished an incredible feat, surpassing their previous accomplishment of determining the complete sequence of the human genome. They created the first computer-designed, synthetically produced genome, which is the set of application programs for an organism. This artificial DNA had over 1 million letters of genetic code that were then read, processed, and executed by the computer systems in the target cell's nucleus. Thanks to Venter, these biological computers are no longer theoretical. They are experimentally verified. In an interview, Venter stated, "Life is basically the result of an information process, a software process. Our genetic code is our software, and our cells are dynamically, constantly reading that genetic code." When cells were discovered over 300 years ago, it was thought that the structure of a cell was very simple. With the inventions of the electron and proton microscopes, we now have a much clearer understanding of the intricacies of life. The cell is an extremely efficient and well-networked computer system with thousands or even millions of processors and billions of bits of information. Cells are the structural and functional units of all living organisms. Some organisms, such as bacteria, are unicellular, consisting of a single cell. Other organisms, like humans, are multicellular, having many cells. In fact, it's estimated that an adult human has over 100 trillion cells, and each cell is an amazing world of its own.